Bad Omens, written by James Scott, read by Drew Grimm. Nibbler stretched lazily, extending his impressive claws as he leaned back and sharpened them on his favorite rug. His sleek black coat gleamed with a radiant glow as he passed through a beam of moonlight streaming through the living room window. When he passed through the shadows of the living room, he blended in so perfectly that only his gleaming green eyes were visible, as though the darkness itself stared patiently at the front door. He knew one of his humans always came back at this time of night, and the moon's glow told him what day was quickly approaching. Excited to make his escape, he decided to avoid the usual shower of attention his human pets gave him every day, and made his stealthy annual exit. Not that Nibbler was not fond of his pets. They were good servants, and always seemed to have an abundance of his favorite treats. Yet every Halloween Eve, he departed like clockwork at the same time, not for himself, but for their own benefit. He began to grow slightly worried when his lead servant did not return on schedule. It was a little later than normal, and he had not heard the familiar sound of their vehicle enter the driveway. If they did not return quickly, he would have to cram himself in the small space behind the fridge and cabinets, where they could never find him, since he didn't want to spend an entire day sleeping in his hiding spot. He flicked his tail with agitated impatience. Many long minutes went by before the human finally arrived, and Nibbler positioned himself by the door, prepared to run outside undetected from the shadows, as he always did. As soon as the door opened, he performed his perfect getaway and set out on his usual rounds. It was Nibbler's lifelong routine to prowl the woods behind his home whenever he escaped from his overbearing servants. It was his responsibility to stalk various rodents, frogs, and insects through the underbrush, leaving them mangled before moving on to the next thing that caught his attention. He didn't stalk them for pleasure, though he did enjoy the hunt. Instead, he felt it was his innate duty to punish them for the sins committed in their past lives. Usually, he would wander for hours before returning home, just in time to be let in through the back door before his servants went to bed. But on this night, like every Halloween Eve, the cat ended his hunting early and headed in the opposite direction with purpose. He moved swiftly through the woods, into the neighboring area, carefully avoiding any interaction or detection by another living soul. Instinct made him briefly contemplate visiting Rusty, but he shook the thought off with determination. On any other night he would go mark a tree near Rusty's house, so that the wind would carry his scent to the yapping dog. But this night was different. He was on a mission. For hours, Nibbler perched on a tree branch outside a house, peering through the window. He listened to the sounds of arguing and the crash of something hitting the floor, yet he remained patient. As the door began to open, Nibbler was already down from the tree and heading toward the entrance. Earl stumbled out of the house, tossing his empty beer can onto the growing pile beside the porch. Spotting the black cat, he drunkenly slurred and swung a kick in its direction. Nibbler, of course, avoided his pathetic attempt with all the nimble grace of a feline in his prime, and ran to take cover in the bushes nearby. Earl was an abusive drunk who would beat his wife and children before storming out in a fury to the local bar whenever he ran out of beer. Afterwards, he would drunkenly pick up prostitutes and stay out long hours while his family cowered in fear, anticipating his return. Earl's son Danny was a kind young boy, and always took the time to wave a string or throw a ball, and would laugh with delight whenever Nibbler chased them. Nibbler could have cared less about strings or balls, but he knew that his antics amused Danny, and felt that it was the least he could do to bring some small joy to the boy's life. The cat had spent many months watching the comings and goings of the people nearby to his home, learning their patterns, judging them through their actions. As Earl sped off in his pickup truck, Nibbler's eyes narrowed in disdain. He took a moment to stare after Earl before leaving. The night was young, and he still had a long journey ahead of him before he would reach his next destination. Ben and Kenny were busy spray painting crude images on the butcher shop window when the old man stormed out, shouting angrily in Italian. They spat at him and flipped him off with smug grins before skating away, laughing wickedly. Mr. Anthony had been the town butcher for over 30 years, and Nibbler had been visiting his shop since he was just a kitten. The old man always left cat food outside his shop and was kind to the alley cats. When a black cat darted in front of Kenny, he swerved toward it, chasing the animal off the sidewalk and into the street. Ben and his friend chased after the cat, but Nibbler skillfully dodged them by darting under a parked car. When they finally gave up, Nibbler bolted into oncoming traffic, forcing a truck to swerve sharply. The air filled with the piercing screech of brakes, followed by the horrifying crunch of metal and shattering glass as the truck collided. The street was a chaotic scene of blood and noise as a crowd gathered around the wreckage. Kenny and Ben were killed instantly, crushed between the drunk driver and a parked car. The driver, Earl, was on his way home to his troubled family. Earl endured weeks of suffering before passing away, without a single visit from his family during his final days. Martha was an elderly woman who lived on the far side of town, and it took Nibbler most of the day to reach her house. Every Sunday and Wednesday, she would shuffle to the end of her driveway to glare at her neighbors and grab the morning paper. Even though it was Halloween, her house had no decorations, and she gave out no candy, sticking to her usual routine of retrieving the paper. She remained oblivious to the spirit of the season. After grabbing her paper, she was heading back to her door when a sleek black cat darted across her path and stopped on the sidewalk, letting out the deepest, loudest meow it could muster. She hissed angrily at the cat and waved the rolled-up paper to shoo it away. The cat knew Martha well. It knew she had taken out an insurance policy on her late husband, Randall, and then withheld his heart medication. She had received a considerable sum after her husband's passing. Randall had been a good friend to Nibbler, always sharing scraps of fish with the cat during dinner. The old man knew just how to scratch the spot on Nibbler's ear that made him purr with delight. Nibbler was devastated by his sudden death and harbored a deep hatred toward Martha. Whether it was her bad hip or just bad luck, on this day, Martha never made the climb up to her front steps. On the second step, she lost her footing and slipped, tumbling backwards and cracking her head hard on the sidewalk. Nibbler watched her for a while with satisfaction, knowing that she was too mean and nasty for anyone to come visit her. Martha would lay there until the mailman discovered her after the holiday. Nibbler was careful to avoid trick-or-treaters as he returned to his business and made his way toward his final destination. Outside of the bowling alley, Joe waited impatiently in his van with eager anticipation. The young woman walking across the parking lot and getting into the car next to him was completely unaware as she rifled through her purse in search of her car keys. She had no idea Joe had been watching her all night. He had been parked in his van for over 45 minutes, waiting for the bowling alley to close. With practiced ease, Joe slipped out of the van just as she passed by, grabbing her, covering her mouth with a gloved hand. She tried to resist as he pushed her into the van and climbed in after her. Using one hand, he swiftly shut the door while she fought to break free. Joe pinned her down forcefully, clutching both of her small wrists in one hand while keeping the other firmly over her mouth to stifle any screams. "If you scream when I take my hand away, I'll kill you. You understand, bitch?" With tears streaming down her eyes, she nodded in agreement. Just as Joe was reaching for his duct tape, he noticed movement and eyes watching him through the window of the van. Joe was startled at first, but he chuckled to himself when he realized that it was just a cat. Joe banged on the window hard. "Scram, cat," he snapped. "You're interrupting But Joe never got to finish his sentence. Blood streamed from his mouth as he began to gurgle. The knife lodged deep in his throat. The blade had gone clean through. Stephanie, the young woman, had started carrying it after hearing about the last assault on the news a few months ago. While Joe was still in shock, she mustered all her strength to roll him off of her. Joe gasped erratically, choking on his own blood. The black cat purred with satisfaction as he made his way home, his long night's work finally finished. As a reward for his benevolence as Pharaoh in his first life, Nibbler was reincarnated every millennium. His ability to deliver justice reached its peak on Halloween Eve. His aura was so powerful on this evening that he always made sure to stay far away from home. He had spent 5 of his 9 lives being pampered and adored as a feline. The souls of his most loyal subjects were also allowed to return with each life as well. They were his pets and servants, but he truly cared for them, as any good ruler cares for their subjects. Nibbler made it home just as the main servant was heading out for morning errands. The moment the door opened, he slipped inside, ready for a long, well-deserved nap. He planned to spend the next year resting, to conserve his energy, watching the neighborhood, observing people's behavior, and judging them, until the next Halloween Eve, when he would show them the bad omen his presence brought.